It is Monday, the 12th of September, 2022. We're heading towards the autumnal equinox. This year it'll be on the 23rd of September, a little bit later than some other years. And I and others are quite concerned about the condition of the Neolithic late Stone Age, that is, cairns at Loughcrew, Ireland. They're basically neglected. An important cairn is essentially the passage in it is closed to the public and maybe deteriorating. So what I want to do is look for solar eclipse symbolism, solar symbolism, lunar symbolism in the rock art, because I am convinced that all of the Boyne Valley Passage tombs, so that would be Newgrange, also known as Sid and Broga, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Knowth and Dowth, they all have fairly obvious solar eclipse symbolism, or even quite accurate depictions of solar eclipses. In the case of the Stone of the Seven Suns at Dowth, that was the first solar eclipse symbolism that I identified back in the mid-1990s. I'm not the only person who has identified depictions of solar eclipses in Boyne Valley rock art. Archaeoastronomer by the name of Paul Griffin, if I remember correctly. He identified some of the rock art, I believe, at Loughcrew as depicting a solar eclipse. Basically the moon overlapping the sun in a partial solar eclipse. And then, quite frankly, I think he was correct. But this is unrehearsed, by the way. This is the first time that I have even looked at some of these. So this is okay. It doesn't seem to say which stone it is. But here, actually, where the finger is pointing, right above it, now to the left, it's going to come back. That, as far as I'm concerned, is a depiction of a total solar eclipse. It's basically depicting the flower-like appearance of most total solar eclipses. Then up to the right, you have that, star pattern. Again, very simple star pattern, but probably a type of rayed sun symbol. Then you have those concentric circles above, right above where the finger's pointing now. That concentric circle, which could easily be interpreted as an eye, and this could very easily be inspired by an annular eclipse of the sun, where the eclipse is ring-like. Essentially, the moon is too far away from the Earth to totally cover the sun during an annular eclipse. So essentially what happens is you see a ring of the outer part of the sun around the moon, when the moon is central. I will add that before the moon is central over the sun, that you get this very horn-like crescent. It's a much more circular crescent than during a total solar eclipse, and that has been perceived as the horns of a bull, a solar bull. So the whole concept of the solar bull, or the solar cow for that matter, whether male or female, the solar bovine, shall we say, that concept comes partly, not entirely, but I would say largely, from the fact that the partial phases of an annular eclipse show something that looks very much like the horns of a bovine. Then we see other concentric circles, sort of eye-like symbols, and the totally eclipsed sun, besides looking like a flower, does in fact look a lot like the pupil and iris of an eye staring down from the sky. I first saw this in Serge Kouchmy's photograph of the 1991 total solar eclipse that was published in the May 1992 edition of National Geographic magazine. It arrived on my doorstep late April of 1992. There was an article on the total solar eclipse of the previous year, the July 11th, 1991 total solar eclipse. And in that article, there was an illustration, a 2-page spread illustration of a very good photo taken using what's called a radial gradient filter. Essentially, it's a filter that's dark in the center and progressively less dark as you get further out towards the diameter of the filter. And the purpose of this is to balance out the light because conventional films cannot handle the extreme range of light that is in a total solar eclipse or other situations for that matter. So something needs to be done to balance out the exposure if you want a photo that looks very much what the actual human eye sees during totality. And so Serge Kouchmy, French astronomer with the CNRS, had this radial gradient filter. I think it was custom made for him. I could be wrong, but in any case, he used it in a way to depict the July 11th, 1991 total solar eclipse as closely as possible to what we see with the human eye. And since then, in the digital age, now we have people making composite images where they overlay single exposures, like multiple exposures at different shutter speeds to give different exposures, and then they blend them to create an image that's very close to what the human eye sees. So let's go to another. Okay, let's even just maybe. I'm not okay. So there we go. So yeah, so I was able to rotate it a bit. I don't know if this does anything. Oh yeah, just raise it. So yeah, this right here, that, as far as I'm concerned, is almost certainly inspired by and a depiction of a total solar eclipse. And then the more simple rayed sun symbols here and here are also very simple solar eclipse symbols, rayed sun symbols. Yeah, this looks like a human figure. It's funny because essentially very high-level Irish archaeologists keep insisting that the rock art on Irish passage tombs is geometric, non-representational art that we cannot understand. This is a literal quote. The we cannot understand or we do not understand. Very recent quote, too. I won't name the archaeologist in question, but honestly, I do not see how this representation can be made when there's fairly obvious representations of the sun. There's fairly obvious representations of the moon. Possible human figures, such as this. Possible boats. And also symbols. I identified a sun-moon conjunction symbol carved into the outer perimeter of the stone basin at Knowth. And as I said, back in the mid-1990s, I identified at least 4 of the rayed sun symbols carved into Dowth's Stone of the Seven Suns as basically quite accurate depictions of a total solar eclipse. So I think we're done with this one, and so we'll close this, and we can maybe see which stone this was. Sealing stone from chamber Cairn T. Yeah, Cairn T is the one that's, I believe, in some trouble. So here, again, we're loading the 3D model. And here again, we have a symbol which I have every reason to believe is a solar symbol inspired by observations of the sun's corona during a total solar eclipse. But it's also, I think, calendrical. I think this, the way it's divided into 8 segments, this is almost certainly a representation of the solar year. It's a representation essentially symbolizing the 2 solstices, the 2 equinoxes, and the so-called cross-quarter days between the solstices and the equinox. This is essentially a symbol of the year, the solar year. I don't see much else on this stone. Maybe there's, okay, I think that might be a rayed sun symbol, but a lot of it's eroded. It seems that the art has been eroded, and this is one of the concerns, is that the art is basically being damaged. So let's go to this one and see what we can find, if anything. Doesn't look like there's much on this one. Nope, I don't see anything of great interest there, so we'll just move along. Okay, this we're going to get to. Let's get to it now. This, I believe, is the Equinox Stone. Yep, that's the Equinox Stone. So this stone is in Loughcrew Cairns, and it's at the back of the chamber. So it faces towards the light outside, and on the equinox, or around the equinox, it's spread over some days, if not a week or more. The sun lights up this stone at sunrise at the equinoxes. So the fall equinox and the spring equinox, this stone is illuminated by the sun. So what do you think these symbols are? Well, it's almost a no-brainer that they're solar symbols. And again, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 very flower-like symbols, which, again, as far as I'm concerned, are almost certainly inspired by and somewhat stylized artistic depictions of the flower-like appearance of most total solar eclipses. And this one has this extension here, which on top, which I think is probably inspired by the polar plumes of the sun's corona. The corona, it's the sun's a big magnet, and so the rays and streamers of the sun at the poles, north and south poles of the sun, they fan out very much the same way that iron filings fan out when you have the near magnet. It looks like a bird's tail, and we'll get to the bird symbolism later, but I think that extension there is probably inspired by and a representation of the polar plumes of the sun's corona. What else do we have? We have some upturned crescents. I was talking about here and here. We have some, upturned crescents, and I do believe that these are representations, or almost certainly representations, of the partial phases of a solar eclipse, and I'd even go so far as to say is, because of how they're depicted, probably an annular eclipse. So as far as I'm concerned, we have depictions of both annular and total solar eclipses on the Equinox Stone at Loughcrew, and this stone is now inaccessible because Cairns has been closed off because of issues with the roof. And here we have a cross above the hand. We have a central circle with a dot in the middle, and then 4 lines in a cross pattern. As far as I'm concerned, this is a solar cross symbol. And solar cross symbols are inspired by the basically the cruciform pattern, the cross-like pattern that can be perceived in the sun's corona, especially when it's at sunspot minimum, where you have the equatorial rays and streamers concentrated, and then you have the fanned out, plumes of the poles above and below, basically forming a cross-like pattern. And it does not look like this. This is a very simplified, stylized, shall we say, depiction. But I have seen scientific astronomical drawings done by astronomers in the 19th century that depict the corona in much the same way, in a very architectural kind of way, shall we say, where the lines are very, very straight, like rectangles, and I mean it does not look like that, but this was clearly the perception, shall we say, of the artist who drew the total solar eclipse. They saw this cross-like pattern and they accentuated it in their astronomical drawing. And there's a fair number of scientific astronomical drawings of total solar eclipses from the 19th century that depict a like a cross-like pattern, a cruciform pattern in the sun's corona in different ways. And then up here we have a simple rayed sun symbol. Here's another one. So I've already identified this previously in memes and stuff, and I've spoken about it, but this is a 3D model. Let's see if we can rotate. I don't think it's going to really do much. Rotating the 3D model doesn't really add to things, but yeah, I see at least 2 simple rayed sun symbols. I see 4 flower-like symbols, almost certainly inspired by the flower-like appearance of a total solar eclipse. I see a solar cross. I see upturned crescents that are almost certainly depictions of the partial phases of a solar eclipse, especially an annular eclipse, and it may also represent the moon. So that's the Equinox Stone at Loughcrew. And I and others are very concerned about the deterioration of Cairns and basically the neglect of Cairns by the appropriate Irish government authorities. They don't seem to be really doing much to protect it. What else we got here? Oh, this is interesting. What do we got here? I actually don't think I've seen this one before, but this looks very much like a artistic impression of a total solar eclipse, as does this, although it's almost combining like the crescents of a partial phase with the rays of the sun's corona, which is entirely possible to do on a artistic basis. And down here we have these upturned crescents, almost certainly depictions of the partial phases of a solar eclipse, but could be also depictions of the moon, and may even be depictions of the solar boat concept, because when the crescents, the upturned crescent of the partially eclipsed sun is observed either rising out of a body of water or sinking into a body of water, it looks very much like a boat coming out of the water and taking to the sky, or sinking into the water after having been in the sky. And this, of course, is all related to the death and rebirth of the sun god. I forgot to even mention that, but pretty well every total solar eclipse, in ancient times, was perceived as the death and then miraculous rebirth of the sun god. We don't believe in sun gods anymore, but this is how it was perceived. It was the death and rebirth of the sun. In any case, whether the sun was perceived as a god or not, total solar eclipses were essentially perceived that way as the death and the rebirth of the sun. And on that note, this